The incident at the airport. Lana Edwards, despite her best efforts to remain calm, felt the weight of the judgment in the air like a suffocating fog. She could sense the prying eyes of the onlookers as she stood at the security checkpoint. People subtly stared at her, some with judgment, others with curiosity. Yet few dared to meet her gaze directly. In that moment, she was no longer just a woman in line at the airport. She became an embodiment of every stereotype, every expectation others had cast upon her because of her appearance. The rough-edged TSA officer's demeanor was already a stark contrast to the professionalism one would expect from someone working in a public security role. He appeared to take pleasure in the power he had over the situation. His gaze was condescending, his smirk full of unchecked arrogance. But that was nothing new for Lana. She had encountered such prejudice her whole life. What hurt more was the helplessness that seemed to ripple through the crowd. No one intervened. When he stepped in front of her, blocking her way, it was as if he had already decided that Lana was guilty of something, anything. "You," he barked, not even waiting for her to speak. "I need to inspect your bag and search your body. You're suspected of carrying illegal substances." The words sent a chill down Lana's spine. Suspected of carrying illegal substances. The accusation made no sense. She had nothing in her bag but the necessities: clothes, toiletries, a few books. It was the kind of thing anyone might bring on a trip, but it was clear from the officer's demeanor that he was not interested in reason. This wasn't about her bag, it was about her. Before she could even protest, before she could fully comprehend what was happening, the officer's rough hands were already reaching for her. He didn't ask, didn't even give her a chance to consent. The touch felt invasive, too intimate in a public setting, and Lana recoiled instinctively, trying to push his hands away. But his grip only tightened, the force of it more about asserting dominance than conducting a necessary security check. Her heart raced. She knew she had to do something, anything, to stop him from continuing. But the moment she tried to move away, his hands seemed to grab more aggressively, pulling at the fabric of her sweater. With one harsh motion, the officer ripped the sleeve of her shirt. Lana gasped, feeling the fabric tear and hearing it rip in the most public, humiliating way possible. She felt exposed in more ways than one. The rudeness, the violence of it. It all hit her at once, leaving her stunned. The humiliation washed over her like a tide, and the anger that had been brewing inside her finally erupted. "How dare you?" Lana shouted, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Her hand instinctively pressed against her now torn sweater, trying to hold the fabric together. But she could still feel the roughness of the officer's hands on her skin. "You just assaulted me. This is assault, you hear me?" Her voice was loud, echoing through the airport's security area, causing the onlookers to glance nervously at each other. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others were too busy with their own lives to care. But there were whispers, harsh whispers. Lana's mind barely registered their words, but the venom in them seeped through. Look at her, just some woman off the street, probably a criminal. Her husband must be some thug. It was a cascade of cruel assumptions, each more hurtful than the last. But Lana, although shaken, refused to cower. She straightened her back, fighting to keep her composure. It didn't matter that her sweater was ruined, that her dignity had been assaulted. What mattered was that she wouldn't let this man win. She couldn't. "My husband will have you fired for this," she managed to say, her voice trembling, but her words resolute. "He will have you arrested and thrown in jail for what you did. This isn't over." The officer's expression twisted into something that bordered on amusement, but it was an ugly kind of amusement, a smirk that made Lana's blood boil. "You think I care about you or your husband?" He sneered, his words venomous. "Consider yourself lucky, filthy black woman. You should be thankful I even touched you." The words hit her like a slap, but Lana was not about to let him win. She could feel the anger surging inside her, but she wouldn't let it consume her. Not here. Not now. Not in front of these people. Why don't you just get your hands off me and apologize? She spat. The words were a challenge, one that Lana knew would go unanswered. The officer stood there, unfazed, his demeanor still one of superiority. The crowd was growing more aware now. Whispers became mutters, but nothing concrete, nothing real. They didn't know who she was or who she was married to. They didn't know anything about her life or her worth, but they assumed they did. They assumed everything about her based on the color of her skin, her clothes, her very presence. Why are you all just standing here? Lana called out to the crowd, her voice breaking with frustration. Why is no one helping me? This man just assaulted me, and you're standing here watching. The officer's eyes darted around nervously, his smirk faltering as the atmosphere began to shift. The whispers had turned into outright stares. He could feel the pressure building, but still, he didn't back down. He was so used to people like Lana, people who he assumed had no power, people who wouldn't challenge him. You black women all dress this way to attract men like me, the officer remarked, his voice low and mocking. What's the problem with a little touch? Lana's face flushed with fury. She had heard enough. Her hands gripped her phone, and without a second thought, she dialed the one number that would change everything. The crowd didn't know who she was calling. They didn't know what her next move would be. I'm calling my husband, Lana declared, her voice still trembling with emotion, but now laced with certainty. He owns this airport. The officer, still smug, let out a sharp laugh. Sure he does, and I'm married to Kim Kardashian, he scoffed, his words dripping with disbelief. He thought nothing of it. He thought Lana was just another person who couldn't possibly hold any real power. But Lana wasn't worried. She knew the truth, her truth, and soon, everyone else would too. The seconds felt like minutes as the call connected. Lana kept her eyes trained on the officer, who seemed to be losing his arrogance, bit by bit. He had no idea what he was about to face. She kept speaking into the phone, her voice controlled despite the turmoil inside her. Brady, it's Lana. We've got a situation at security. As she waited for her husband to arrive, Lana kept her gaze fixed on the officer, who now seemed less certain. The crowd began to shift, murmurs of surprise rippling through the air as people tried to make sense of what was happening. But for the officer, it was too late. Lana was no longer the object of ridicule. She was a woman with a voice, with the power to demand justice. And her husband was coming. The arrival of Brady, the atmosphere in the airport's security checkpoint, had shifted from casual annoyance to something far more intense. The officer, whose previously unshakable arrogance seemed to be crumbling, stood awkwardly before Lana, a nervous tension visible in his stiff posture. His earlier smirk had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Lana could see it in his eyes. He had realized that this was no ordinary confrontation. There was more at stake here than his petty attempts to dominate a woman he deemed beneath him. Lana, in contrast, stood tall despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. Her pulse raced, but her resolve was unyielding. Her phone was still pressed to her ear, and the conversation with her husband, Brady, had shifted from a mere phone call to a moment of purpose. She could hear his voice on the other end, calm yet unmistakably firm. I'll be there in a few minutes. Don't engage with him. Just keep your head straight. I'm handling it. Brady's voice commanded, smooth as velvet, but carrying an authority that couldn't be ignored. Lana felt a small wave of relief wash over her. Brady was not just her husband. He was the director of this airport. The realization of who he was, however, wasn't what filled her with confidence. It was knowing that Brady would do what needed to be done, no matter what. His reputation was built on integrity, fairness, and strength, and he had fought for those values his entire life. This officer and a crowd of onlookers who had wrongly judged her didn't know what they were about to face. Brady's role wasn't the only reason she felt the surge of courage now. It was because this moment wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for herself, for every woman who had been underestimated, for every black person who had been stereotyped, for every single person who had endured injustice and humiliation at the hands of those who thought they could treat others as inferior. This was bigger than the incident. It was about showing them that things were about to change. She ended the call, her grip tightening on the phone as she hung it up. The TSA officer, still fumbling with his gloves, seemed to sense the shift in the air. The once gloating smugness that had painted his face was now replaced by a palpable uncertainty. The security checkpoint felt smaller now, more claustrophobic, as if everyone in the vicinity had slowly realized they were watching something that was about to turn into a spectacle, one that would be impossible to ignore. Lana turned toward the officer, locking eyes with him for a moment. Her gaze was steady, resolute, and unflinching. The officer's expression faltered as if he were struggling to regain control of a situation that had already slipped out of his grasp. "You know, the worst part about this whole ordeal," Lana said, her voice cool but cutting, "is that you think this is all some game. That you can treat people like this and get away with it." She took a slow step closer, her presence towering over him despite their height difference. "But I'm not some nameless woman you can bully. I'm not going to let you get away with it. And when my husband gets here, you'll realize just how wrong you are." The officer opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was speechless, his hands twitching at his sides. His previous bravado had evaporated, and he seemed unsure of how to proceed. Every second that passed made him more aware of his misstep. This wasn't the way things were supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control. He had been trained to handle these situations with authority, to intimidate, to belittle. But here he was, standing in front of a woman who refused to cower, a woman who clearly had the means to tear his world apart with a single phone call. Lana took another step back, surveying the scene as her heart steadied. The crowd had gone quiet now, their whispers replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Some of the onlookers had begun to edge away from the scene, as if they didn't want to be caught up in whatever was about to unfold. Others, however, had stayed rooted to the spot. Curiosity mixed with uncertainty on their faces. They had seen a woman, someone they had written off as inconsequential, fight back against an authority figure, and they were unsure how to process it. But it wasn't the crowd that mattered. It wasn't even the officer. It was the imminent arrival of Brady. Lana's phone buzzed in her hand. It was a message from Brady. "I'm here. Stay where you are. I've got this." She inhaled deeply, pushing aside the last remnants of tension, and allowed herself to relax slightly. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had the right people behind her. Moments later, a tall, confident figure emerged from the crowd, his stride purposeful and unwavering. Brady Edwards, in his sharp suit and polished shoes, cut through the airport like a force of nature. His presence demanded attention. Every step he took exuded authority and composure, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of controlled fury, that made the officer step back instinctively. Brady's gaze swept over the scene in an instant. He took in the damaged sweater, the officer's sweaty palms, and the horrified stares of those nearby. Without a word, he approached Lana, his gaze softening as he gently placed a hand on her arm. It was a simple gesture, but one that grounded her. In that moment, she knew that everything would be fine. "Are you all right?" Brady asked, his voice steady and soothing. Lana nodded, her chest swelling with gratitude. She didn't need to speak further. Brady's presence alone was enough to make the officer's guilt even more palpable. "Gentlemen," Brady's voice rang out with quiet authority, and the officer stiffened, still trying to regain his composure. "I'm Brady Edwards, the director of this airport. It's quite a shame that I'm being called into this situation, but it's clear that it was poorly handled from the start." The officer's face drained of color as he realized the gravity of the situation. Brady didn't wait for a response. He had already moved on to the next step. "I don't know who you think you are," Brady continued, his voice growing colder. "But I can assure you, this is not how we run things here. You don't have the right to treat anyone this way, and especially not my wife." He turned toward the other security officers in the area, his gaze sharp as he addressed them. This behavior will not be tolerated. I expect an immediate review of what's happened here. Lana watched as the officer began to shrink under Brady's gaze. His hands twitched at his sides, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and fear. There was no bravado left in him now, only the knowledge that he had made a grave mistake. "And as for you," Brady said, turning back to the officer, his tone venomous, "I will be calling for a full investigation into this incident. If this is the kind of professionalism I can expect from your team, I'll have every single one of you reassigned. And you," he added, pointing a finger directly at the officer, "will never work at this airport again. I guarantee it." The officer's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He couldn't even muster a defense. His eyes flicked nervously to the other officers, but they all seemed just as uncomfortable. They knew who Brady Edwards was. They knew what he was capable of. This was a man who had built an empire on trust and fairness, and he wasn't about to let anyone tarnish that reputation, especially not over something as petty and disgraceful as what had just transpired. Brady's eyes softened as he turned back to Lana. His gaze spoke volumes, a mixture of love, empathy, and unwavering support. "We'll make sure you're okay," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. Lana smiled, a feeling of strength rushing through her. This was just the beginning. What had started as a moment of humiliation was now about to turn into something far bigger, a statement that would echo through the entire airport, through the entire community. Things were going to change, and this officer would learn that the consequences of his actions went far beyond the confines of his uniform. The fallout. The bustling hum of the airport slowly resumed its usual rhythm as the initial tension began to dissipate. But for the TSA officer, the air around him seemed to thicken. The towering presence of Brady Edwards, with his sharp suit and no-nonsense demeanor, had left an indelible mark on the scene. Brady's authority was unquestionable, and the security officers present knew that the fallout from this incident was inevitable. There was no way around it. This was no longer just a minor misunderstanding. This was a major breach of conduct. As Brady stood beside Lana, his hand still gently resting on her arm, the officer fumbled nervously with his gloves. He had been caught in a situation he wasn't prepared for, and now he was trapped, with no way out. Brady's reputation was well known in the airport industry. He was the kind of man who ensured fairness and treated people with respect, regardless of their background or status. The officer had clearly misjudged the situation, not understanding the magnitude of his actions. But it wasn't just about Brady's role as the director. It was about the principle of it all. His actions had crossed a line, and now he was about to pay the price. Lana stood quietly, her anger still simmering beneath the surface, but tempered by the comfort of her husband's support. The security personnel in the area exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the tension but unsure how to react. They had seen their colleague's arrogant attitude when dealing with Lana earlier, but now they could see the gravity of the situation unfolding before them. No one had expected this. No one had anticipated that a simple act of humiliation would escalate into a personal confrontation with the director of the airport. Brady's sharp eyes scanned the group of security staff. He wasn't just angry. He was deeply disappointed. He had built the reputation of this airport from the ground up, ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, was treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. To see one of his own employees act in such a disrespectful, discriminatory manner was a slap in the face. Without a word, Brady turned to the deputy director, who had been standing at the periphery, unsure of what to do. Her eyes widened as she approached him. "Brady," she began tentatively, "I'll take care of this. We'll conduct a full investigation, and the officer involved will be dealt with according to protocol." Brady's piercing gaze softened, but there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. "I don't want protocol. I want action. This kind of behavior doesn't belong here, and I won't let it slide. I expect a full report on my desk within the hour. No delays, no excuses." The deputy nodded quickly, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Of course, Brady. I'll handle it right away." As she hurried off to make the necessary calls, Brady turned to the officer who had caused the uproar. The man was still standing where he had been, his shoulders slumped and his eyes on the ground. His smug confidence from earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear that was hard to miss. Lana's gaze met his once more, and this time, there was no anger, just a quiet resolve. "You should have thought about your actions before you touched me," she said, her voice steady but laced with power. "You thought you could get away with it. You thought I was just some woman you could humiliate. But you were wrong." The officer's eyes darted from Lana to Brady, his mouth opening as if to say something, but the words never came. He realized too late that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had initially imagined. This wasn't just about his job. It was about his integrity, his future, and the relationships he had built. He had made an enemy of the wrong person, and there was no way to undo the damage. Brady, sensing the officer's internal turmoil, crossed his arms over his chest and leaned in slightly. His voice was measured but firm. "You've disrespected my wife, and in turn you've disrespected me and this airport. There's no apology that can make up for this. And it's not just your job that's at stake right now. It's your future in this industry." The officer swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. He wanted to protest, to explain himself, but the words were stuck in his throat. Brady's words were too powerful, too filled with authority for him to argue. The entire airport now knew about his disgraceful actions, and there would be no hiding from the fallout. Just as the tension in the air seemed to reach its peak, a loud voice broke through the silence. "What in the world is going on here?" Lana turned toward the source of the voice, recognizing the tall figure of Cameron, the airport's deputy director. Cameron was known for her sharp wit, fierce intelligence, and no-nonsense attitude. She was someone who had earned respect over the years, not just because of her professional acumen, but because of her commitment to fairness and equality. As she walked briskly toward the group, her gaze immediately locked onto the officer, who seemed to shrink even further under her scrutiny. "I just received a call," Cameron said, her tone icy. "What I've heard doesn't sound good. Is this really the kind of behavior we're allowing at this airport?" Brady nodded, his voice calm but resolute. "It's exactly what's happening, Cameron. One of our officers assaulted my wife today. He tore her clothes, and worse, he humiliated her in front of a crowd. It's unacceptable. I want him off the premises right now, and I want every single officer who witnessed this to be questioned." Cameron's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of disbelief on her face. But it quickly passed, replaced by the steely determination that everyone had come to expect from her. She had always been a staunch advocate for fair treatment, and she wasn't about to let this incident slide. "I'll handle it," Cameron said firmly. No one is above accountability, especially when it comes to something as serious as this. She turned to the officer, who was now trembling in place, his face pale. "You," she said sharply, "are no longer welcome here. I suggest you pack your things and leave. I'll be filing a formal report, and you can expect to be investigated fully." The officer's mouth opened again, but still, no words came out. His fate had already been sealed. Cameron didn't wait for any further response. She gestured to the security team members who had been standing by, their expressions a mix of concern and discomfort. "Escort him to the back office. We'll handle the rest there." As the officers took the disgraced TSA agent away, the crowd that had gathered around the scene slowly began to disperse. The whispers faded, but the impact of what had just transpired lingered in the air. The security staff who had watched the incident unfold knew this wasn't just another routine exchange of authority. This was a turning point. It was a clear message that no one, no matter their position, was exempt from accountability. Lana, still standing beside Brady, let out a slow breath, her heart finally beginning to calm. The scene had been chaotic, and yet there was a sense of relief that settled over her. This wasn't just about the assault. It was about the systemic change that needed to occur. It was about showing people that they couldn't hide behind their prejudices, that their actions had consequences, and that justice would prevail. As they made their way out of the security area, Lana felt Brady's reassuring presence beside her. She had always known he had her back, but today, more than ever, she realized just how much he would fight for her. For justice, and for the integrity of the airport they both loved. "You did the right thing," Brady said quietly, squeezing her hand as they walked. Lana nodded, her gaze firm. "We both did." And as they moved forward, leaving the remnants of the chaos behind, they both knew that the real work was just beginning. There was a bigger fight ahead, a fight for respect, for fairness, and for the kind of world where no one would ever have to endure such humiliation again. The ripple effect. The days that followed the incident at the airport were a whirlwind of media attention, public outcry, and corporate investigations. Brady Edwards, always known for his quiet authority and calm demeanor, found himself at the center of a storm he hadn't anticipated. The call for justice that had been sparked by Lana's humiliation rippled across the airport community and beyond, catching the attention of the press, local activists, and even national organizations focused on racial discrimination and workplace harassment. Though the aftermath had been swift, it was anything but simple. Brady had acted decisively, but now he was forced to navigate the complex web of public relations, internal politics, and the legalities that came with the scandal. Lana, for her part, had remained remarkably composed. Her courage to stand up for herself, to demand accountability, had not only brought about swift consequences for the officer involved, but had also inspired a movement of sorts, a call for change that was much bigger than one isolated incident. Brady's office became a hub of activity. On one side, he had his legal team, advising him on how to handle the pending lawsuit and the scrutiny of the media. On the other side, the airport's senior management team was busy coordinating the internal investigation and ensuring that all employees, especially those in security, were retrained on the principles of respect, diversity, and inclusion. Brady had always emphasized these values, but now it was clear they needed to be reinforced in every corner of the airport. Despite the chaos, Brady had made it clear from the beginning that he would not back down. "We're going to do this right," he'd said repeatedly. "It's not about protecting the airport's image. It's about making sure this never happens again. We need to lead by example." Lana, though still reeling from the violation she'd endured, was unwavering in her resolve. She became a quiet force behind the scenes, working with a team of advocates to ensure that the airport took comprehensive steps to address the deeper issues at play. There were conversations about better training for TSA staff, the need for a more diverse workforce, and the creation of a formal mechanism through which passengers could report instances of discrimination without fear of retaliation. It was clear that the systemic issues that had allowed the TSA officer to feel so emboldened in his actions weren't isolated to just one individual. They ran deeper. But it wasn't just about the structural changes. Lana's own journey was one of healing and reclaiming her power. As a woman of color, she had been subjected to microaggressions, biases, and assumptions for most of her life, but this incident had shaken her to her core. What had happened wasn't just an assault. It was a reminder of the everyday struggles that people like her faced, the way they were often dehumanized and stripped of their dignity in public spaces. In the weeks that followed, she found herself grappling with the trauma while also finding strength in her husband's unwavering support. Brady had been her anchor, her voice of reason when the weight of the world seemed to come crashing down. One evening, as they sat together on their balcony overlooking the city, Lana opened up to him. "I thought it was just me," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I thought that maybe I was just being sensitive, that I was imagining things. But it's not just me. It's so many of us." Brady, ever the listener, leaned back in his chair, his hand resting on hers. "It's not just you, Lana. "You've done something powerful here. You've shown everyone what happens when we let these things go unchecked. But this doesn't end with us." "It can't." Lana nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I'm not going to let them forget. They can't just apologize and think it's over. It's time to make some real change." Her determination was palpable, and Brady admired her even more for it. He knew that, despite the comfort and security their lives afforded them, this fight was personal for Lana. It wasn't just about the airport, the officer, or even their own well-being. It was about a larger fight for justice, for fairness, and for the right to exist in a world where people of color, especially black women, didn't have to face the kind of indignity that had occurred on that fateful day. As the media frenzy intensified, Brady and Lana had to balance the demands of the press with the ongoing work behind the scenes. At the airport, changes were being made swiftly, but the scrutiny from the outside world wasn't easy to handle. Articles were written about the incident, some focusing on the bravery of Lana and Brady, others questioning how something like this could have happened in the first place. Calls for more systemic reform were louder than ever, and the pressure to do more, faster, grew daily. But for Lana, it wasn't the public eye that mattered most. It was the small victories that began to accumulate in the days after the incident. She was contacted by several advocacy groups that focused on racial justice, and she was asked to participate in panel discussions and workshops about discrimination and the treatment of black women in the workplace. As a private individual who had never sought the spotlight, Lana initially felt conflicted about stepping into this role. But as she thought about the lasting impact this incident could have, she realized that her voice was powerful and it needed to be heard. If her story could inspire change, then it was worth every moment of discomfort. Lana's first public speaking engagement came at a community event where she was invited to share her story. As she stood in front of a crowd of hundreds, she felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her. But then, she looked out at the faces before her, so many people of different races and backgrounds, all listening intently. And she felt a shift. This was bigger than her. This was about creating a world where the next person didn't have to go through what she had. This was about ensuring that everyone was treated with dignity, no matter who they were or where they came from. Brady stood beside her, his quiet support still grounding her, but it was Lana who took the stage that day. She spoke about the moment of humiliation she had endured, the trauma of being touched without consent, and the power she had found in standing up for herself. She spoke not just as a victim, but as a survivor, someone who had used her pain to spark change. The hardest part was not just being assaulted, but realizing how many people out there faced the same thing every day. Lana said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "And it's time we start listening. It's time we make sure no one else is made to feel small. No one else should ever feel like they don't belong." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lana felt a mixture of relief and pride. She wasn't just telling her story, she was creating a movement that would push for change, not just in airports, but across all industries. She realized that every step she took forward, every conversation she had, was a step toward making the world a safer, more inclusive place for everyone. Back at the airport, the changes were becoming more tangible. A new policy was instituted that allowed passengers to report incidents of discrimination anonymously, ensuring that their voices would be heard without fear of retaliation. There were also mandatory diversity and inclusion workshops for all employees, starting with the security team. Brady personally oversaw the training, ensuring that it was not just a formality but a commitment to creating a culture of respect at the airport. But despite the progress, Brady and Lana both knew that this was just the beginning. The ripple effects of that day would continue to shape their lives, but they were determined to see it through, to ensure that their fight for justice didn't end with one incident. Together, they knew they could change the narrative. And as they faced the challenges ahead, they were ready, united in their mission, stronger than ever before. A call for accountability. As the dust began to settle in the aftermath of the scandal at the airport, both Brady and Lana Edwards found themselves at the intersection of personal growth and societal change. The story had become a viral sensation, but it had also sparked a far-reaching conversation on racial discrimination, workplace abuse, and the treatment of individuals in public spaces. The impact was undeniable. However, while the media storm began to die down, the real work was only just beginning. For Brady, the days following the incident were a blend of intense scrutiny and unexpected clarity. He had spent years building the airport's reputation as a model of efficiency and professionalism, but now his leadership was being tested in a way he hadn't anticipated. The very institution he had worked so hard to cultivate had failed Lana, and in turn, it had failed the larger community it served. This failure was not just about one officer. It was about a culture of complacency, a failure to address the deep-rooted biases that had festered within the workforce. The first move Brady made was to hire an independent consulting firm to conduct an in-depth audit of the airport's operations, focusing specifically on issues of race, equality, and employee conduct. He wanted to ensure that the systematic problems weren't swept under the rug or dismissed as isolated incidents. He understood that the changes that needed to happen were far-reaching, and the idea of starting from the top was central to the institution's transformation. "Everything needs to be on the table," Brady said during a board meeting where he presented the decision. "We're not just going to address the surface-level issues. If we want real change, we need to dig deeper and confront the hard truths." Lana, too, had her hands full. Despite her deep desire to move forward and reclaim her life from the trauma she had endured, she found herself thrust into the limelight. She was invited to appear on national television, speak at conferences on diversity, and consult with organizations that focused on racial justice. Though she didn't seek this attention, she realized that her voice had become an important tool for change. What had happened to her was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a larger systemic problem. One morning, while Brady was at the airport overseeing some of the changes that were being implemented, Lana attended a town hall meeting organized by a local activist group. It was her first time speaking publicly since the incident, and she was nervous. As she walked into the packed auditorium, she was greeted by dozens of faces, some familiar, some not, but all eager to hear what she had to say. Taking a deep breath, she stepped up to the podium, clutching her notes. The room fell silent. Lana's voice broke the stillness, strong but filled with emotion. She began to speak, her words carefully chosen but powerfully delivered. "On that day, when I stood in that airport, I didn't just feel humiliated," she began. "I felt like a symbol of everything that's wrong with the way people of color are treated in this country. It wasn't just about one officer's behavior. It was about the hundreds of silent bystanders, the unchecked power, and the systemic inequality that allows people to feel they can get away with this." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd. There were murmurs of agreement, and some people even wiped tears from their eyes. Lana continued, not just talking about her own pain, but about the broader issue of racial profiling and discrimination in public spaces. She spoke about her hopes for a future where no one would have to endure the same kind of treatment she did, where the color of someone's skin would never influence the way they were treated in a public setting. But as she spoke, Lana's mind was not only on the message she was delivering, it was on the legacy she was building. She knew that she had a rare opportunity, an opportunity to leave a mark on the world, to ensure that her experience wasn't just another story of injustice, but a turning point for change. Meanwhile, at the airport, Brady continued to work tirelessly. The independent consultants he had hired reported back with startling revelations. The report revealed that there was a deeper, institutionalized problem within the airport, one that involved not just a few rogue employees, but a pervasive attitude that allowed for microaggressions, biased decisions, and discriminatory practices to go unchecked. The report was damning, and Brady had no choice but to act quickly and decisively. He initiated an emergency staff-wide meeting where he personally addressed the findings. "We have failed. We have failed you, our employees, and the passengers who trust us every day," he began, his voice firm but not accusatory. "This is not just about the incident with Lana. It's about every time we let prejudice slip through the cracks. Every time we turn a blind eye to behavior that we know is wrong." Brady outlined a series of sweeping reforms: mandatory diversity and inclusion training, the establishment of a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, a more transparent system for handling complaints, and a restructuring of the airport's Human Resources Department to ensure that complaints would be taken seriously and addressed swiftly. He also announced that a new independent oversight board would be formed to review all disciplinary actions and ensure that those in positions of power were held accountable. The changes were met with resistance from some of the older employees, but Brady's resolve was unshakable. He was determined to show that true leadership meant taking responsibility, even when it wasn't easy. He knew that this process would take time and patience, but it was necessary. The airport needed to be a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel safe, respected, and valued. In the weeks that followed, the transformation at the airport began to take shape. Employees were required to attend workshops on racial bias and cultural competency, and a new hotline was established to report any form of discrimination or mistreatment. The Human Resources Department became a key player in fostering a culture of accountability, ensuring that employees who violated the airport's new standards faced immediate consequences. Lana, for her part, kept pushing forward. As she continued to speak at public forums and meet with leaders in the activist community, she realized that the personal healing she had been seeking was starting to align with the broader societal healing that was needed. She wasn't just healing from the trauma of the incident. She was contributing to a collective healing process, one that sought to dismantle the structures of racism and inequality. It wasn't easy. There were days when she felt overwhelmed by the weight of her newfound responsibility. There were moments when the trauma of the past resurfaced, and she had to fight the urge to retreat into herself. But each time, she remembered why she was doing this. She remembered the woman she was before the incident, the woman who had been so often overlooked, underestimated, and disregarded. She knew now that she had the power to change that narrative, not just for herself, but for countless others. And so, as the airport slowly began to rebuild its reputation and its practices, so did Lana. Together, they faced the world, a world that was beginning to shift, one where accountability, justice, and equality were no longer optional, but imperative.